Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world where the streets are dusty, the sun hits like a vengeful god, and the only thing colder than the bureaucracy is the beer, which, by the way, isn't even cold. Imagine trudging through ancient Ur, the Sumerian city-state bustling with traders, priests, tax collectors, and goats. So many goats. In one hand, a clay jug of beer that looks more like barley soup than a crisp lager. In the other, nothing. Because you're a taxpayer now and you need both hands free for regret. You probably won't survive this. Seriously, no air conditioning, no bug spray, and definitely no refunds. But if you're curious how ancient Sumerians turned beer into currency and taxation into fermentation, you're in the right place. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your city and local time. I love seeing how far this sleepy little history ride travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The heat slaps your skin like a steamed linen towel the second you step outside your modest clay house. It's early before the sun reaches its full lava lamp intensity, but already the alleys of Ur buzz with the sounds of traders hawking grain, oxen snorting through the dust, and the occasional curse as someone trips over a loose brick. You duck past a woman carrying a basket of dried fish, wave to a boy leading a donkey with what looks suspiciously like your neighbor's door strapped to its back, and make your way toward the temple district. Why? Taxes, and not the paper kind. Here in the 24th century BCE, taxes are physical, edible, and mildly alcoholic. You owe beer, not gold, not coin, not even sheep this time. Beer. That murky, frothy, slightly sour concoction brewed from barley and water, left to ferment in sun-warmed vats, stirred with sticks that have probably never been washed. Beer is life here. It's currency. It's wages. It's taxes. And it's about to be your problem. You approach the ziggurat, that massive step pyramid rising like a stack of toasted loaves. Inside, the temple officials are tallying the month's offerings, goats, sacks of barley, and of course, beer. Some jars are half full, some are suspiciously light. A scribe with ink-stained fingers squints at a tablet, muttering, 3 silla owed, 4 received. He scratches his head, looks around, then casually eats part of the wax seal and re-rolls the tablet. You pretend not to see. Historians still argue whether tax obligations were truly standardized across city-states, or if the whole system ran on vibes and bribes. What we do know is this. Beer was deeply embedded in the economic and spiritual life of Sumer. It wasn't just a drink, it was a necessity, a food substitute, a divine offering, and yes, a handy tool for making sure the working class stayed mildly buzzed and less likely to riot. The beer you owe is based on your barley yield. Let's say you farm a modest patch of floodplain. After the annual inundation, assuming the canals didn't overflow too much, you harvest your barley. A scribe, or possibly a smug neighbor, moonlighting as a tax collector, records your yield on a clay tablet. From that total, a portion is owed to the temple, not necessarily in raw grain, but in finished product, the good old bread and beer combo. You remember your mother mumbling about the old days, when temples just took a chunk of your grain and called it a tithe. Now, they want it brewed, they want it measured, and they want it sealed in their own jars with their own marks. If you tried to pass off weak beer, too watery, too sour, or, gods forbid, contaminated with ergot, you'd be in for a stern talking to, followed by manual labor or a lot less barley next season. The temples, after all, are the original megachurches meet Walmarts. They employ scribes, herders, brewers, and soldiers. They organize construction projects. They manage warehouses. And they expect the people, especially farmers like you, to supply the fuel for that machine. Barley in, beer out, taxes paid. That's the thing about beer in ancient Sumer. It's not the kind of beverage you drink on a hot day for fun, though honestly, it helps. It's thick, nutritious, and packed with calories. Some call it liquid bread. You call it dinner. And every jar you deliver has to meet temple standards. Not too watery, not too old. Definitely no floating rat parts. You once saw a brewer beaten with a barley whisk because he tried to substitute date mash for part of the grain. "We're not Acadians," the priest barked, whatever that meant. As you hand over your jars, 1, 2, 3, you notice a small pale lizard baking itself on the sunlit steps. It doesn't blink. Neither does the priest who accepts your delivery. He sniffs each jar, then nods. You're done. For now. Behind you, a younger farmer is arguing. His beer's too weak, he says. The barley was bad this year. Locusts. Or was it mold? Maybe both. The priest sighs and scribbles something on a tablet. The man's shoulders sag. He'll owe more next month. You trudge away, your hands empty, your debts cleared. For today. Later, you'll drink some of your own batch, less filtered, less taxed. You'll pass it to your kids, who drink it like porridge. You'll fall asleep on a straw mat, belly warm, mind buzzing. And you'll dream of beer again. Always beer, always taxes. You wake to the distant chant of temple scribes and the faint smell of wet clay warming in the sun. It's not unpleasant, really, kind of like old bread left near a fire. The beer in your belly has settled into a fuzzy kind of comfort, but there's no time to laze. Today, you're heading into the heart of the real magic. Cuneiform, counting cones, and jars labeled with the tax records of an empire that still doesn't believe in toilet seats. Down the street, children play with pebbles and rush past a scribe in training who's muttering to himself over a lump of fresh clay. His reed stylus jabs and swirls like a chicken trying to peck its way out of a papyrus sack. He's writing numbers, or something like numbers. Actually, you're not totally sure what those little wedge marks are supposed to be, but they're important. These strange little impressions, pressed into clay tablets, are the administrative lifeblood of Sumerian society. And the whole thing, it started with beer. See, a few centuries ago, nobody wrote anything down. People just remembered. You'd say, "Hey, I gave you 3 goats last week. Where's my barley?" And the other guy would say, "I gave you 5 back." You'd argue, then maybe throw a sandal or 2, and that would be that. But once temples started receiving hundreds of jars of beer and thousands of sacks of barley, memory wasn't cutting it. Priests needed receipts, so they started using tokens, little clay counters shaped like cones, spheres, and discs, to represent quantities. 1 cone might stand for a jar of beer. 5 cones in a basket, 5 jars. Easy. But what if you needed to send that basket across town with a message? You couldn't just trust the delivery boy not to snack on a barley cake and forget one of the jars. Enter clay envelopes. They'd seal the tokens inside a hollow ball of clay, then press the shape of each token onto the outside. Boom. Tamper-proof record. But that still wasn't good enough. Eventually, someone decided to skip the tokens and just draw the symbols directly into wet clay. And just like that, writing. Historians still argue whether this was purely an economic invention or if religion had an equal hand. But let's be honest, when your gods drink beer and your priests demand it, the line gets pretty blurry. You step into a record room behind the main temple and blink in the dim, cool air. Rows of shelves, baked mud, splintering slightly, hold stacks of cuneiform tablets. Some are the size of your palm. Others look like they could kill a medium-sized goat if dropped from the right height. And every single one of them? Beer, barley, labor, debts. The daily breath of Sumerian life, scratched one wedge at a time. You pick up a smaller tablet and squint. 4 sila of beer delivered by Nanasig to Temple of Inanna. That's it. A note. A receipt. The bureaucratic ancestor of your modern paycheck stub, except yours doesn't come with a side of divine judgment. A scribe passes by, his robes spotted with ink and sweat. He gives you a tired nod and mutters something about 30 new tablets by dusk. You nod sympathetically, though you're not sure what's worse. Hauling barley in the sun, or sitting hunched over clay all day making triangles. It's a common assumption today that Sumerian writing was full of myths, legends, and philosophical musings. But in truth, most of the surviving tablets are receipts, lists, logs, bureaucratic admin so tedious it could make a demigod yawn. They wrote stories too, of course, epic ones about floods and kings and gods. But the birth of writing, that was about keeping track of your booze. Quirky detail time, some early tablets even came with instructions like, do not erase, or read to supervisor, the ancient equivalent of CCing your manager. You wonder if that poor delivery boy from last week got demoted after his beer quota came up short. The room's quiet, save for the soft clink of styluses against clay and the occasional frustrated sigh. You imagine the scribe at the far end of the hall, a young apprentice, probably stuck on the 15th repetition of 1 jar beer, 2 goats. His stylus stabs downward, then hesitates. He wipes sweat off his nose with the back of his hand and tries again. You've been there. Iduba, the scribal school, wasn't for the faint-hearted. It was rigorous, competitive, and occasionally violent. You had to memorize hundreds of signs, each with multiple meanings depending on context. A single wedge out of place could turn barley payment into the goat weeps. You'd be lucky to escape with your ears unboxed. Back outside, the market's in full swing now. Merchants shout over each other, pushing carts piled with lentils, flax bundles, and dried fish. Somewhere, a donkey shrieks. You grab a small beer from a vendor's stall, this one flavored with date syrup and something that smells like yesterday's sandals, and sip it slowly. Not bad, not great, but it counts. A child runs past with a toy made from a broken stylus and some string. You smile, then glance down at the beer jar in your hand. It's marked. You recognize the sign. 3 triangles and a slash, probably the same scribe who tallied your taxes last week. You wonder if he's watching you now from behind a clay tablet, wondering if you'll pay your dues on time next cycle. You will. You always do. Because here in Sumer, beer isn't just a drink. It's your balance sheet. You pass a pair of bull statues flanking the temple gates, their chipped eyes staring past you with eternal disapproval, and head into the deeper courtyards of the city. Today's tax inspection is done, your beer jars accepted without insult or smiting. But your curiosity leads you onward. Through narrow corridors and down mud brick stairs, you emerge into a bustling plaza where something more powerful than kings or gods holds sway. The temple economy. You're used to thinking of temples as sacred places where people offer prayers, burn incense, and beg for rain. Here in Sumer, sure, there's incense. There are also warehouses, account books, herds of oxen, metalworkers, and some very aggressive goats. The temple doesn't just take your beer, it owns the system that makes you need it in the first place. From where you stand, you can see workers carrying in loads of barley from river barges. Young women unload jars of finished beer from reed baskets, while a priest in spotless robes checks every container with a critical sniff. He doesn't look happy. You wouldn't either if you had to judge beer quality in 110-degree heat while wearing 3 layers of wool. You wander toward the main storage building, past walls daubed with faded frescoes of gods, drinking from oversized cups. Divine happy hour. Inside, the temperature drops and the smell hits. Fermented grain, damp straw, a hint of mildew. It's not terrible. You've smelled worse. Remember that time someone tried brewing with rotten onions? Yeah. You still dream about that disaster? Here, temple workers, mostly women, are sorting beer into categories. Strong beer, everyday beer, ceremonial beer. You spot a barrel marked offering grade and raise an eyebrow. The priests are picky. Offering beer has to be thick, rich, and potent enough that even the gods might feel something. Whether or not the gods actually do drink it is still an open scholarly debate. But hey, someone's got to polish off the leftovers, right? Near the far corner, a row of scribes hunched over low benches tracks every delivery, every cask, every grain of barley. You spot the familiar sign for sila, the unit for measuring liquid volume, about a liter, and beside it, gur, a larger measure that'll make you regret every time you ask for a big one. In Sumerian society, the temples are more than religious centers. They're the original corporations. They employ thousands. They own fields, orchards, flocks, and ships. They handle loans, collect debts, and redistribute food and beer as wages. If that sounds suspiciously like a government, congratulations, you're catching on. Separation of church and state? Not even close. Here the priests run the show, and they do it with ledgers and vats. And if you think this system is voluntary, you're adorable. Every citizen is tied into this web of obligation. You give barley, you give beer, and in return the temple might feed your family during a bad harvest, loan you seed, or patch up your roof after a storm. In theory. You've heard stories about delayed aid that suspiciously aligns with bribes or political favoritism. You once saw a man's field get mysteriously reassigned because his cousin insulted a temple supervisor's beard. Tragic. The temples maintain loyalty by making themselves indispensable. You need beer to pay taxes? The temple controls the breweries. You want to avoid dying of thirst? The temple owns the wells. You want your name recorded favorably in a divine list so the gods don't smite you during eclipse season? Yep, the temple again. And still, there's something comforting in the order of it all. Back outside, you follow a side path to the edge of a field where temple laborers, people like you, but poorer, are threshing barley by hand. They sing to keep rhythm, voices rising and falling like wind through the reeds. A boy offers you a handful of cracked barley. You chew. It's gritty, slightly sweet. You nod your thanks. A priest overseeing the field eyes you warily. You recognize him. He once fined your uncle for under-delivering beer, even though the man had a fever and a wife in labor. Rules are rules, he'd said, scowling over his tablet like it owed him money. You move on. And yet, despite all the rules, there are moments of surprising fairness. A widow who can't brew enough beer might be allowed to pay in bread. A farmer who loses his crop to a flood might be granted a temporary exemption. The priests claim this is mercy. You suspect it's more like strategic investment. After all, dead taxpayers don't ferment anything. Quirky fact? There's evidence some temples even kept beer credit systems. If you provided extra in one season, it might carry forward to the next. Kind of like a rewards card, except the reward is not being dragged into forced labor. You pass a low wall etched with graffiti, children practicing cuneiform signs. You squint and make out the phrase, "Great beer from muddy barley." A joke? A complaint? Maybe both. You remember that joke when you get back home and find your cousin trying to ferment his barley in a cracked pot with a piece of cloth that smells like socks. You both agree not to mention this batch to the priest. Night falls, and the city glows softly with torches and oil lamps. You sit on your roof, legs dangling, sipping from a small jar of your personal stash. It's not temple grade, not even close, but it's yours. The temple looms in the distance, quiet now, but alive in your imagination. Inside, the beer still bubbles in clay vats, watched by priests and scribes and a dozen tired women stirring with wooden paddles. Somewhere, a clay tablet is drying in the dark, pressed with symbols that say whether your taxes are paid or your debts are growing. You sigh and sip again. Another day in Sumer, another debt measured in beer. The morning air is thick with mist and the unmistakable scent of river mud, wood smoke, and, of course, fermented barley. You stretch, sore from another night, sleeping on woven mats, and rub the crust from your eyes. No time for lazing. Today you're going upstream, literally, into the marshy arteries of the Tigris and Euphrates, where the raw ingredients of your tax beer begin their journey. You trudge down toward the docks, the slurpy sound of sandals in wet silt, reminding you why you keep meaning to patch that hole in your left shoe. Before long, you're aboard a flat-bottomed boat packed with amphorae and two very hungover oarsmen. One nods at you, eyes red. "Strong batch last night," he mumbles. You nod back, pretending you didn't see him drink half a tribute jar before sunrise. This trip isn't just for sightseeing. You're headed to a barley farm, one of the many feeding the temple's insatiable appetite. And by farm, you don't mean a quaint family plot with goats and a singing shepherd boy. No, this is industrial scale. Fields stretch out in every direction, a checkerboard of green and gold cut by irrigation ditches and levees maintained by temple workers and conscripted villagers. Historians still argue whether these temple-administered fields were managed like public utilities or more like enslaved labor systems under a holy disguise. Either way, someone's sweating for every jar of tax beer you offer. As you dock and step onto the muddy shore, your feet squelch into the thick silt, and you're greeted by a farmer hauling a sack of grain twice his size. He waves with his free hand, the other dragging the load behind him. His tunic is patched and sweat-stained, and he smells like someone who's been sharing living quarters with oxen. You like him immediately. "Barley's decent this year," he tells you as he leads you toward the threshing area. "Not like 3 years ago. Flood nearly took my cousin's liver and his house." The fields are alive with activity. Teams of workers bend over stalks, cutting and bundling, their scythes flashing in the sun like brief sparks of judgment. Some sing work chants, rhythmic and repetitive, meant to dull the ache and scare off snakes. You hum along badly and get a few sideways glances. The freshly cut barley is piled on tarpaulin sheets where oxen walk in endless patient circles to thresh it. It's hypnotic, hooves clopping, chaff flying, the steady scrape of wooden tools sorting grain from straw. A group of children follows behind, gathering what spills. Every kernel counts when it might end up in a priest's breakfast beer. You're offered a handful of fresh barley. It's sweet, nutty, and a little dusty, like popcorn made by someone who hates joy. You chew politely, then try not to cough. The temple owns this land, of course. The farmers, they're not slaves exactly, but they don't exactly have options either. They owe fixed shares of their harvest to the temple, measured in bushels, not feelings. Too little, and the scribes mark you for reassessment. Too much, and the quotas go up next year. It's a game no one wins. And then there's the tax beer. Once the barley's harvested, the temple calculates how much should go toward beer production. It's not a guess. They use actual math. Not your kind of math. Sumerian math. Base 60. 60. So while you're trying to remember if 4 gur make a pie, they're busy converting barley weight into beer volume, adjusting for evaporation, spoilage, and mysterious losses. Spoiler. The mystery is usually rats, or thirsty guards. Inside a small barn, you watch as the barley is ground with flat stones into coarse flour, mixed with water and left to sprout. The malted barley smells earthy, almost sweet. Then it's dried, crushed again, and stored until needed. From here, it'll travel to a central brewery, probably strapped to the back of a cart, pulled by oxen that look like they've seen things. Quirky aside, some farms add a secret ingredient, date mash. Not because it tastes better, but because the priests believe it tastes better. And a happy priest means fewer fines. You once saw a batch rejected because it had too many weevils. The priest scowled and said, "The gods do not favor insects." Harsh, but fair. As the sun climbs higher, you join a few farmers for a quick break. They share a weak beer, barely fermented, served in cracked bowls. It's watery and warm, but refreshing after a morning in the fields. One man jokes that the temple must water their beer with tears. Another suggests trading a goat for better hops. You all laugh, even though no one in this region even uses hops yet. You rest under the shade of a fig tree, watching as another batch of barley is loaded for transport. Each sack is stamped with a seal, the farmer's name, date, expected volume. If there's a mismatch on arrival, someone's in trouble. That's why every batch has a witness and a second seal. Trust is good. Verification is better. You remember this when you spot a donkey looking particularly guilty near an open sack. On the ride back, the boat is heavier, creaking with sacks and worry. A scribe rides with you this time, double-checking seals and muttering to himself about quotas. You try not to look like someone who once spilled a whole jar and blamed evaporation. As the city's silhouette reappears over the reeds, you feel it. That looming presence, part temple, part warehouse, part brewery, all power. The barley you watched harvested will be beer soon, and that beer will pay wages, feed workers, grease the wheels of priests, and most importantly, cover your taxes. Because in Sumer, you don't just pay to live, you brew. Back in the city, the barley you just watched get hauled onto boats is already being carried into vast courtyards, ready for its transformation. You follow the trail of dust and song to the brewery, a complex of interconnected rooms that smell like warm bread, yeasty air, and something faintly sour, like wet cloth left in the sun. It's not a smell you'd bottle, but it does mean beer is brewing. This is where the magic, or at least the fermentation, happens. Sumerian brewing doesn't look anything like your local craft microbrewery. No copper tanks, no hops, no plaid shirts. Instead, you see deep clay vats sunken into the floor, reed mats covered in sticky barley mash, and women, always women, stirring the thick sludge with wide wooden paddles. Their arms are strong, their songs louder than the bubbling slurry, and their expressions somewhere between meditative and mildly annoyed. "Don't let it scorch," one warns a younger brewer, gesturing toward a vat. "Unless you want it to taste like sandal." You walk carefully, sidestepping a puddle of wort, the barley sugar liquid that's halfway to beer, and watch a team kneading dough. Wait, dough? Yep. Because here's the twist. The beer here begins as bread. They bake special loaves called bapir, dense, twice-baked barley cakes packed with malt and often flavored with date syrup. These loaves are stored, sometimes for weeks, until needed. To start a new batch of beer, brewers soak and crumble the bapir in water, mix in additional malted grain, and let time and heat work their wonder. The result? A thick, porridge-like brew that ferments slowly over several days. It's not clear exactly how long. Historians still argue whether ancient Sumerians timed fermentation by moon cycles, daily temperature, or just taste testing until someone saw double. You've seen the latter method firsthand, and then comes filtering. Sumerian beer is cloudy, chunky even. You don't drink it so much as navigate it. There's no bottling, no carbonation, and certainly no heady foam. It's scooped straight from the vat or jar into large jugs, and often consumed communally through long straws, because nobody wants to chew a mouthful of floating barley husks if they don't have to. Quirky detail. Some straws were made from gold or precious metals for elite drinkers, decorated with tiny filters near the base. Imagine sipping sludge with elegance. That's the Sumerian dream. At the far end of the brewery, you spot rows of enormous clay jars, sealed with wax and marked with a scribe's touch. These are the finished products, beer ready for consumption, distribution, or divine approval. You lean in to sniff a newly opened jar. It's tangy, earthy, and definitely alcoholic. Not a drink for the faint of stomach. A priest arrives, his robes freshly starched, a reed stylus tucked behind one ear. He dips a ladle into the jar, tastes, and raises one eyebrow. Barely. A nod follows. Success. This batch is acceptable, which means no do-overs, no penalties, and no one being forced to sweep pigeon droppings off the ziggurat stairs this week. This isn't just beer, it's currency. Liquid tax, liquid wage, and sometimes liquid bribe. A brewer's mistake isn't just embarrassing, it's politically risky. You follow a few jars as they're loaded onto reed sledges, bound for the temple. One of them bears the mark of your own household. That's your beer being hauled away. It'll be poured out later before an altar, a god, or maybe just a slightly bored scribe pretending to be impressed. You've learned not to ask where it really ends up. Behind you, an older brewer lights a small lamp near the fermentation room, a quiet ritual of thanks. Some say the goddess Ninkasi watches over the brewing process, her breath in every bubble. Others say she just wants her own cut. Either way, most brewers offer a little prayer before every batch. Ninkasi, the woman mutters, let this one not smell like goat. You leave her to it and wander through the rest of the production rooms, noting how precise everything is, despite the seeming chaos. Every jar, every loaf of bapir, every stir of the mash is recorded. The scribes flit between chambers like nervous birds, carving updates into wet clay tablets that track everything from barley weight to mash temperature to the exact number of jars poured from each vat. You once asked a scribe what happens if they drop a tablet before it's dry. He gave you a long look and said, "It's happened twice. We don't speak of it." And so the system turns. Barley comes in, bread is baked, mash ferments, beer is poured, taxes are paid, workers are fed, gods are honored, and a few lucky people, even you on good weeks, get to keep a jar or two for their own use. Not that you ever officially skim off the top. But hey, accidents happen. Like that time your beer jar fell sideways and half the contents disappeared into the floor cracks. Tragic, mysterious, delicious. Outside the brewery, the scent of brewing clings to your skin. Sour, sweet, sticky. You pass a group of kids playing with discarded reed straws, pretending to be priests and tax collectors. One shouts, "Pay your beer or the gods will sneeze on your house." You laugh, then wince. That kid has been listening way too closely during temple announcements. As you head back home, the sun sets behind the ziggurat, painting the sky in bruised oranges and golds. A neighbor waves from his roof, holding up a small cup in toast. "Good brew today?" he calls. You nod. For once. And as you sip from your own jar, your private stash, you taste barley, date, dust, and something else. Responsibility. Because in Sumer, your beer isn't just a drink. It's your duty. You wake to the distant thud of temple drums echoing off mud brick walls and the rhythmic squawk of ibises along the riverbank. The sun hasn't cracked the horizon yet, but the city's already moving. Today is collection day, the day your beer officially becomes someone else's problem. You stretch, yawn, and make a half-hearted attempt to tame your bed hair. The gods don't care what you look like, but the tax scribes definitely do. Downstairs, your family's beer jars sit in neat rows near the door, sealed with wax, each stamped with your household seal. a small carved cylinder that leaves behind a looping, flowery pattern unique to you. One jar looks suspiciously lighter than the others. You don't ask. Someone probably got thirsty last night. You were asleep, so it can't legally be your fault. As you step outside, your neighbors are doing the same. All across the district, households emerge like beetles from clay hills, balancing pots on shoulders, carts, or the backs of stubborn donkeys. A few folks grumble, but most move with the weary precision of people who've done this too many times to still complain. The temple of Inanna looms in the distance, the first sunlight gilding its stepped facade. That's where the beer goes. That's where everything goes. If you're breathing, you owe something to the temple. Grain, labor, sheep, reeds, or beer, especially beer. And here's the part most modern folks don't realize. Tax collection in Sumer wasn't just a one-time yearly thing. It could happen monthly, even weekly, depending on what you owed and how much. Your payment wasn't some abstract number. It was physical, tangible, and heavy enough to throw your back out. Beer was common because it was stable, easy to store, if sealed, and valuable. Everyone drank it, including the gods, allegedly. So you join the caravan heading temple-ward, your donkey groaning in quiet protest. You pass the city's gates, past open markets and sleepy guards, until you reach the temple courtyard. That's where the real fun begins, because paying your beer tax is not just a drop-and-go situation. Oh no, it's a process. You queue up, standing behind a woman balancing 3 jars on a cart, and a merchant whose assistant is fanning his forehead like he's royalty. You're sweating. Your tunic is sticking to places you'd rather not mention. The air smells like wet clay, body odor, and, yep, beer. Ahead, under a shaded portico, a group of temple scribes awaits, their styluses sharp, their clay tablets soft, and their expressions locked in permanent disapproval. These are the keepers of the temple ledger, the tax police, the glorified hall monitors of your fermented obligations. One of them sees you and gives a curt nod. You've been here before. Your jars are unsealed, sniffed, stirred, and judged. One scribe makes a note, another mutters about viscosity ratios, and a third taps a tiny stick against the side of a jar like he's listening for its soul. After a tense moment, you hear the best words in Sumerian. Acceptable. Record it. A tablet is pressed into soft clay, marking your household, volume, and quality rating. You sign by pressing your seal into the corner. It's weirdly satisfying, like stamping your name into the future. Historians still argue whether these taxes were truly fair or if they disproportionately burdened non-elite households. Some say the system was designed to extract just enough to keep people dependent, never comfortable. Others argue that temple redistribution, paying workers, feeding orphans, hosting festivals, balanced things out. But you, standing here with sore shoulders and barley breath, just want to get through the line. Your jars are taken away, carefully, reverently, like they're gifts for the divine, not sloshy containers that spent the night in your storage hut. A pair of teenage novices carries them off, giggling and sloshing more than they should. You make a mental note to never drink from those jars again. But here's where things get weird. Sometimes beer tax isn't just about paying the temple. It can also be about earning something in return. If your batch is especially good, or if the temple happens to be short, you might be offered a contract, a small clay slip, a token of favor. It's rare, but it happens. And today it happens to you. The elder scribe squints at your entry, tastes the beer again, and frowns. Then he whispers something to a junior scribe, who disappears into the inner sanctum. You pretend not to notice. Pretend not to get your hopes up. When the junior returns, he carries a small sealed tablet. A provisional supplier's contract, he says. Temporary, 1 month. Congratulations. You're stunned. That's huge. You try to play it cool. You nod like this is routine. Of course, you say, happy to provide for the temple. Inside, you're already planning how to tell your cousin in Eridu. The contract means prestige, a higher tax quota, yes, but also recognition, possibly gifts, maybe even a ceremonial robe if things go well. Your family will talk about this for weeks. Your donkey looks unimpressed. On your way out, you pass a man being reprimanded for a spoiled batch. The beer turned sour, likely from poor sealing or heat. He's pleading, sweating, offering to bring another jar tomorrow. The scribe shakes his head. Spoiled beer offends the goddess, he says. The man bows so low you fear his neck might snap. Just as you're leaving, someone hands you a small token. Literally. A palm-sized clay piece bearing the temple's insignia and your name. It's a marker showing you've paid today. You tuck it into your belt like a trophy. Later, you'll press it into wet clay for your records, then dry it on your rooftop like every good taxpayer. This evening, when the city quiets and shadows stretch long across the courtyard, you'll sip from the one jar you kept behind. The sky will turn lavender. A breeze will stir the reed mats. And you'll think about your beer, now sloshing in sacred jars, somewhere deep in the temple vaults. Or, more likely, chilling near a priest's private chamber. Because in Sumer, your beer doesn't just pay the gods. Sometimes it opens doors. You wake up sore but smug. Your feet ache from the hours in line, your arms from hauling jars, but your ego inflated like a date cake. You've become a beer supplier for the temple, at least for the month, and that makes you, technically, a player in Sumeria's most sacred economy. Time to walk with a bit more shoulder sway. But don't get too comfy, because with honor comes obligation, and yours begins before the sun even climbs halfway into the sky. A temple runner, no older than 13 and twice as self-important, shows up at your door waving a clay token and demanding, "They need more by noon. 6 jars. Bring it yourself." You sigh. Of course they do. The temple might be the spiritual center of but it also functions as the region's logistical headquarters, tax bank, warehouse, and occasionally, daycare center. Its appetite for beer is bottomless, not just for rituals, but for wages. You're not the only one getting paid in barley brew, and so begins your crash course in the ancient Sumerian labor economy. Your new status grants you access to the distribution zone behind the ziggurat, a space strictly off-limits to regular citizens. You haul your freshly sealed jars through the side gate, guarded by 2 bored men in bronze helmets who look like they haven't smiled since the last eclipse. One checks your token, the other sniffs your jar. "Smells like work," he mutters, and waves you in. Inside, it's a maze. Storage vaults made of brick and plaster, stacked high with barley, grain, oil, and, yes, rows and rows of beer jars. The smell hits you first. Warm yeast, clay dust, and the tang of slow fermentation. It's the scent of taxes, wages, and organized chaos. You notice the queue of workers forming near the temple's wage booth. Some carry reed mats, others tools, others nothing at all but their hands and the hope of employment. These aren't priests or scribes, they're day laborers, hired for digging canals, repairing city walls, threshing grain, or cleaning up after priests' sacred animal sacrifices. And guess what they're all waiting for? Beer. Because here's a historical kicker. Beer wasn't just a tax item, it was a paycheck. Sumer's state-run economy didn't deal in coins or bills. Instead, temple bureaucrats paid workers with rations, measured portions of barley, bread, oil, and beer. Especially beer. Why? Well, it was calorie-dense, mildly intoxicating, and far safer than drinking river water. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a lunch voucher, with a buzz. One woman, her tunic stained with mud, collects her payment with a practiced nod, a cup of beer and a small loaf. She downs the brew in seconds, wipes her mouth with the back of her hand, and says, "All right, what needs digging?" Quirky fact: these beer rations were astonishingly detailed. Workers got specific volumes based on rank, gender, and job type. A basic laborer might receive 2 liters per day. A high-status craftsman, up to 5. Historians still argue whether these portions included weaker, small beer for daytime work, or stronger batches for end-of-shift merriment. Either way, if you drank the full portion, you'd probably need a nap under a shady palm. A scribe jots down names and checks them against a master list. He uses a wedge-shaped stylus to press signs into a wet tablet, recording who got what, when, and why. The bureaucracy is thick enough to chew. You wonder if anyone ever asked for a raise, or at least a slightly colder cup. But here's the odd part. You notice some of the tokens being exchanged aren't the usual beer for labor slips. They're fancier, embossed with divine symbols and geometric patterns. Festival rations, someone whispers. Big celebration next week. You raise an eyebrow. More beer? The man grins. More everything. Because when a festival rolls around, say for the goddess Inanna, or a good harvest, or some king's unnecessary birthday, the entire system goes into overdrive. Temples ramp up production, workers get bonus rations, and the city becomes one big barley-fueled block party. This, you realize, is why the beer economy functions so well. It's not just tax and toil, it's also celebration and reward. The same drink that pays your dues is the one you toast with when those dues are behind you. But there's a darker undercurrent here too. Some people in line don't speak. They wear drab clothing and avoid eye contact. You learn they're indentured servants, people who owe debts, often passed down through generations. Their beer rations are smaller, their names marked with faint diagonal strokes on the tablets. They're part of the machine but can never truly get out of it. And then there are the orphans. A small cluster of children waits near a low bench, each clutching a tiny cup. A priestess oversees their rationing, part of the temple's social duty. It hits you. This beer, this brew you hauled and fermented and cursed while stirring. It doesn't just pad temple storage. It sustains the city, even its most vulnerable. There's a strange comfort in that. As you drop off your final jar and receive a fresh clay token confirming delivery, a novice offers you a cool sip straight from the temple's own reserves. It's smoother than yours. Less sediment. Faint notes of dates and honey. You nod in appreciation. Nice fermentation, the novice beams. We let Ninkasi handle it. Of course they did. You wander home past the city walls, past reeds whispering in the wind, and past a small boy blowing into an empty straw like it's a flute. You're tired, sweat-stained, and barley-brained, but you're also part of something big, something ancient and absurdly well-organized. In Sumer, beer doesn't just sit in a cup. It flows through people, pages, paychecks, and prayers. And now it flows through you. You're barely through your front door when your cousin barges in, breathless and wide-eyed, clutching a tiny clay tablet like it's a puppy on fire. "You won't believe this," she gasps. "They want me to audit temple beer records." You blink. They trust you with numbers. She ignores the jab, pacing your living room as if temple walls might suddenly grow up around her. They're behind on entries. Too much intake, not enough scribes. I start tomorrow. I get a stylus and everything. Now, this is interesting. Because while you've been elbow-deep in fermented paychecks and sun-baked taxes, there's another part of the beer economy that runs silently behind the scenes. The records. And in Sumer, records are everything. Picture it. Behind every jar hauled, every wage handed out, every ration poured, There's a small army of scribes working by lamplight, etching tiny cuneiform wedges into soft clay tablets. Their job? To track it all. Your cousin is about to join that world, and you, nosy as ever, plan to watch it unfold. The next morning you trail her to the temple's administrative wing, tucked behind a thick wall decorated with carvings of divine accountants, figures hunched over tables, styluses in hand, beer jars conveniently floating in the background like holy office supplies. Inside, it's quieter than you expect. No shouting, no clanking. Just the soft scrape of stylus against clay and the occasional yawn. Dozens of scribes sit at low benches, each with a basket of tablets, a pot of water to keep the clay soft, and a 1,000-yard stare only bureaucracy can produce. Your cousin is assigned to tablet row 4, seat 7, right between a scribe who smells like onions and another who hums off-key lullabies. She's handed a blank tablet and a list of codes, symbols representing names, beer quantities, container types, and tax periods. It's alphabet soup, but in mud. Her first assignment: check yesterday's entries against the physical inventory. Simple, right? Ha! She quickly realizes that the entries aren't as clean as she thought. Some scribes use shorthand, some leave off crucial symbols. One even doodled a cat where a household name should be. Historians still argue whether that was laziness or an early attempt at humor, she mumbles to you. You grin. Probably both. You watch as she cross-references tablets with the jars in storage. Each jar is tagged with a seal impression or tied-on label, many of which have faded in the heat, or worse, been swapped. Why swapped? Well, temple politics. You overhear a scribe whispering, "This batch? It's from the high priest's cousin. Don't mark it spoiled." Nepotism. The oldest beer additive in history. It turns out that keeping temple beer records isn't just about math. It's about power. Who gets listed as a premium supplier? Who's forgiven for a bad batch? Who gets reclassified from donation to tribute to dodge a higher tax tier? The scribes are gatekeepers, bean counters, and bureaucratic bouncers. And of course, there are the beer tokens. Each transaction, whether a tax payment, wage, or ration, is paired with a token. Small clay discs or tablets, often stamped with the temple's seal. These tokens act as physical proof. You give beer, you get a token. You give a token, you get beer. Lose it. Too bad. No record, no brew. Fringe theory of the day. Some scholars believe these tokens were the precursors to written language itself, that Sumerians developed writing not to compose poetry or carve epics, but to track taxes and beer. It's oddly poetic, in a practical, buzzed kind of way. As your cousin works through the inventory, she starts finding discrepancies. Not a few, dozens. A jar marked as delivered sits untouched. Another listed as spoiled is actually fine. A batch labeled for festival use is missing entirely. She brings the findings to her supervisor, a tired man with an impressive ink stain on his tunic. He skims her notes, sighs, and says, "Don't worry. We'll mark them retroactively. Happens all the time." And just like that, history is rewritten. That's the strange part of all this. The records aren't stone. They're clay. Software malleable. Until they're dried and fired, they can be altered, scraped smooth, rewritten. A jar of beer can vanish from the records with a damp sponge and a good story. You leave the temple that day with your head spinning. Not from beer, but from bureaucracy. Every drop you brewed, every jar you hauled, every token you earned. It all exists in a tangle of half-dry clay, crammed in storage rooms and temple shelves, subject to the whims of whoever holds the stylus. And yet, somehow it works. Despite the flaws and fraud, the beer keeps flowing. The workers keep working. The gods keep getting their share, whether or not they drink it. Back home, you press your own record tablet into wet clay. A small slab listing the jars you delivered this week, the tokens you received, and a crooked impression of your seal. You set it to dry on the window ledge, beside a lizard sunning itself like it owns the lease. You wonder if anyone will ever read it. Maybe some future scribe, centuries from now, brushing sand off your name and wondering what kind of beer you made. The tablet hardens in the light. You exhale slowly. Even if records can lie, your beer doesn't. The next morning, you're up before dawn, stomach grumbling, dreams still fuzzy with barley foam. You stretch, roll over, and there it is. Your record tablet from yesterday, dried solid overnight. The seal a little lopsided, but hey, no one's perfect. You turn it in your hand like it's a trophy, or a receipt, or maybe both. You tuck it into your tunic and head for the plaza. Today is market day, and while you're technically done with your temple duties for the week, you have a plan brewing, pun intended. Because once you've paid your taxes in beer, and once you've received a few ration tokens for your trouble, there's still one very modern question rattling around in your ancient Sumerian skull. Can you make a profit? And the answer, as always, is, well, maybe, if you're clever. Down in the market district, the air is thick with the scent of roasted leeks, animal dung, and ambition. Merchants shout over one another, waving textiles, pottery, and dried fish like they're throwing the world's loudest parade. You find the food row first: date cakes, honeyed locusts, flatbread sprinkled with sesame, and then, tucked between a potter's stall and a basket seller, you see them. Freelance beer vendors. Yep. Outside the temple's formal system, the beer economy has sprouted legs and started moonlighting. These aren't state-sanctioned operations. They're individuals, families even, who've brewed a little extra on the side. Maybe a surplus. Maybe a special recipe. Maybe just not interested in donating everything to the priesthood. They stand behind reed mats displaying ceramic mugs, hand-carved with little faces or spiral designs, filled with what they proudly proclaim is honey-thick, date-sweet, temple-better beer. One elderly man has even trained his goat to stand on a rock and bleat when someone takes a free sample. Quality control, he says with a wink. You stop by a particularly popular stand run by two sisters who serve beer in tiny cups shaped like palm nuts. You sip. It's incredible, dark, foamy, and spiced with something smoky. You ask what it is. Burnt fig leaves, one of them grins. The trick's in the drying. Mainstream fact. Sumerians didn't just make one kind of beer. There were dozens of varieties. Strong beer, dark beer, filtered beer, sweet beer, even a light version probably made for kids or laborers on long shifts. Some recipes included dates, others used emmer wheat, and a few experimental souls tossed in herbs or smoked grains. Each type had a name, many lost to history but lovingly scratched into tablets next to food lists and feasting records. But here's the kicker. These market beers aren't just for drinking. They're also currency. You see a woman trade 2 cups of her homebrew for a bolt of linen. Another offers a clay jug in exchange for a fresh obsidian blade. People are using beer as barter, and while the temple may run the official economy, here in the shadow of the ziggurat, you've got capitalism in its earliest form, burping quietly between transactions. And you're thinking, I could do this. You've got some leftover supply. You've got tokens to trade. And after your temple stint, you've got, dare you say it, a bit of a reputation. So you strike a deal. You offer a vendor a few jars of your beer on consignment. She'll sell them from her stall and you'll split the profits. She sniffs it, swirls it, takes a sip, and nods. It'll sell. Not bad for tax beer. You feel absurdly proud. But naturally, the minute you start doing well, trouble finds you. Late afternoon, a man in a crisp linen tunic with an embroidered priest's sash approaches the stall, He doesn't speak, just lifts one of your mugs, sniffs it, and then points to the mark on the clay. "Temple seal," he says flatly. "This was part of an official delivery." The vendor looks at you. You look at your sandals. Because, yeah, you might have sort of rerouted one of your jars meant for the temple back into your personal stash. Historians still argue whether this sort of thing was widespread corruption or just creative survival. The truth is, in a system with so much beer flowing in so many directions, it's hard to say who's cheating whom. The lines blur, seals fade, clay cracks. Luckily, you're not caught. The vendor acts fast. She dumps the jar, smashes the seal, and says, "Spoiled batch." Just decoration. The priest stares, pauses, then nods and walks away. You owe her. Big time. She just saved your brewing butt from a flogging. Or at least a fine. So you let her keep all the day's profits and, instead of sulking, take a stroll down the residential side of town to see who else is in the game. Turns out it's everyone. There's a woman brewing from her rooftop using sun-dried herbs, a man fermenting in broken oil jars patched with wax, kids collecting old straws to resell for drinking thick beer without gulping chunks. It's an entire informal economy, what modern economists might call a parallel market. You call it Sumerian side hustle. One man even shows you his clay cylinder, a record of neighborhood contributions to a feast, complete with beer quantities from each house. It's like a block party ledger, with bubbles. You ask if it's official. He snorts. If it was official, it wouldn't be any fun. You smile, walking back through dusk, firelight flickering off rooftop ovens, the air alive with sizzling onions and off-key singing. You feel something shift. You started this journey with a debt, a dusty jar, and a temple deadline. Now you've got your own batch in the market, your name whispered in at least one plaza, and a cousin writing your deliveries into permanent clay history. You're not just surviving the beer tax economy anymore. You're brewing within it, around it, even beyond it. The system's not flawless. The rules are soft. The power flows with the barley. But you've got a mug, a market, and a plan. Your sandals slap softly against the dusty street as you head home under a twilight sky smeared with gold and burnt rose. The city is quieter now. Kids have stopped chasing each other with mud balls. Vendors pack up what's left of their wares. Temple drums echo faintly in the distance, marking the hour. Not that you've worn a proper timepiece in your life. You just go by shadows and gut feeling. Mostly gut. As you near your doorstep, something catches your eye. A small clay token wedged into the crack between two bricks. It's not yours. It bears no temple seal. Instead, it's stamped with a crude image of a man. Maybe a king. And what looks like a fish. Weird. You pocket it, already planning to show your cousin. She's been getting way too confident in her scribe work, and a mystery token might knock her down a peg. Turns out it doesn't stump her at all. She grins when she sees it. "Ah," she says, flipping it over. "Private brewery, East Quarter. Not official, but getting bold." And just like that, another layer peels back. Because while you've seen the temple run system and dipped a toe into the shadow economy of beer stalls and rooftop fermenters, now there's this. An entire underground beer operation, so organized it's minting its own tokens. You need to see it. Your cousin warns you, they don't love strangers poking around, especially not ones who pay temple taxes. But naturally, you ignore her and go anyway. You follow the token's fishy clue past the outer wall, down winding alleyways that smell like cabbage and old boots, until you reach a door painted with black streaks and a faint symbol, a jug tilted sideways. You knock. No one answers. You knock again. Then the door creaks open, and you're greeted by a man with a headband, a smirk, and arms covered in barley dust. "Lost?" he asks. You hold up the token. He grins. You're early. You don't argue. You follow him inside. The room is cooler than outside. Thick brick walls do wonders for heat. And it's buzzing. Not loudly, but there's a hum of activity. People stirring mash in shallow troughs, shaping lids from clay, weaving straw filters. The smell is deeper than temple beer, richer, darker, almost nutty. They're experimenting here. You meet the owner, a woman named Shira, whose face is sun-lined and serious. She eyes you for a long beat before asking, "Temple scribe?" You shake your head. Brewer, taxpayer, occasional trader. That earns a small nod. We track by taste, not tablets, she says. If your brew's worth remembering, we remember. And you realize this is a record-keeping system too. Just oral, sensory, lived in. No styluses, no baked tablets. But still, memory, value, tradition, mainstream historical fact time. Not all Sumerian brewing was tied to temples. As urban populations grew and cities sprawled, more independent operations cropped up, run by families, guilds, and even rogue priestesses who preferred hops to hymns. Some catered to specific groups, merchants, laborers, even musicians, offering beer tailored to their stamina or moods. You sample one batch made with myrtle berries, another smoked over driftwood. One is fermented with figs and aged in pottery wrapped in river reeds for extra soul. It tastes like nothing you've had before, like someone fermented a story. Shira catches your reaction and smirks. You're tasting our calendar. You raise an eyebrow. She explains, each batch follows a lunar cycle, brewed on specific days, aged during specific phases. They believe beer made under a full moon staves off fevers, while beer brewed at a new moon boosts fertility. Is it science? Probably not. Is it compelling? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether these lunar brewing traditions were genuine belief systems, early agricultural superstition, or clever marketing. But in this space, surrounded by sweat, laughter, and jars bubbling like sleepy witches' cauldrons, belief doesn't need proof. The fish token, Shira explains, is part of their barter network. You trade in your sealed mug and token, you get beer. Return the mug, get a new token. It's fluid, like the drink itself. They've even got carved ledgers, not clay tablets, but wooden boards with inlaid pebbles to track regulars' credits. It's beautiful and fragile, because, like your cousin warned, this setup is illegal. Not brutally persecuted, at least not yet, but frowned on. The temple has a monopoly on official beer distribution. That's how they collect taxes, control rations, maintain power. Underground brewers like Shira, they're rebellious bubbles in the system, tolerated until they get too big, or too good. You ask how she stays under the radar. Bribes, she says, not blinking. Also, priests like variety. You laugh, but she doesn't. She's not joking. You offer to trade one of your own jars in exchange for a sample of their moon beer. She inspects your seal, smells the lip of the jar, then nods. Trade accepted. You can come back. And just like that, you're in. You leave the warehouse with a full mug, a borrowed token, and a new understanding. Beer isn't just tax. It's community, competition, risk, and resistance. Back home, you stare at your modest brewing setup, the same barley sacks, the same clay jugs, and something shifts. You're part of something bigger now, a network, a tradition that sidesteps power while still holding it. And when your cousin comes by later that night to brag about finishing her first monthly ledger without a single scratch-out, you hand her the moon beer and say, "Here, taste this." She sips. Her eyes widen. "Did you make this?" "Nope," you say, "but I helped pay for it." The heat the next morning is already pressing down like a wet wool blanket, and you're barely awake when your neighbor shouts your name from across the alley. "Oi, you! You're in the list. You blink, rubbing crust from your eyes. What list? The conscription one, for the barley hall. You groan. See, for all the brewing, bartering, and fish token adventures you've been juggling lately, the city hasn't let go of its basic needs, chief among them, moving literal tons of barley. And someone's got to do the heavy lifting. Turns out, this week, that someone is you. So you drag yourself to the work crew at the edge of the fields, just beyond the irrigation canals, where barley's harvested, dried, bundled, and transported into the city granaries. You join a team of 15, mostly farmers, scribes' sons, and that one guy who's always barefoot no matter what. You know the type. You're handed a long pole with baskets dangling at each end. The barley haul isn't measured in strength exactly. It's about rhythm. Sway wrong, and you tip the whole batch. Sway right, and you look like a parade float of ancient carbs. As you settle into the slow, grueling pace under the rising sun, a few things become clear. First, barley is the lifeblood of the city. Every single loaf of bread, batch of beer, animal feed, or temple ration hinges on this humble grain. Second, beer is not just a drink here. It's a calorie delivery system. You're sweating buckets, your legs feel like reeds, and when break time comes, you don't get water. You get beer. Thick, cloudy, sour-sweet beer. Mainstream historical fact. Beer in ancient Sumer was consumed daily by virtually everyone. Laborers, nobles, even children. It wasn't alcoholic in the modern sense. It was nourishment, safer than water, and easier to digest than raw grain. Some brews were more porridge than potion, sipped through straws to filter out sediment. As you sit in the dust, slurping from a communal jug passed between calloused hands, you realize just how much depends on this process. Without barley, there's no beer. Without beer, there's no tax. Without tax, the temples don't function. The ziggurat doesn't get repaired. The festivals don't happen. The gods don't get fed. And when the gods get cranky, well, you've read the myths. You probably won't survive that. But here's something unexpected. As the sun dips low and the final bundles are carted into the storehouses, the overseer, an older man with one eye and a voice like a drum, gathers everyone. Payment, he grunts, lifting a chest. Inside, jars of beer. Not money, not grain, not tokens. Beer. 1 jar per head. Your share for hauling barley is barley's second form. You can't help but laugh. This is beer paying for beer. It's barley reincarnated. A fringe detail you've heard whispered before now makes perfect sense. Some Sumerians referred to beer as liquid bread, not just poetically, but literally. The line between chewing and drinking was blurry, and the economy didn't mind. You sip your wages on the walk home. It's thinner than temple beer, but refreshing, light on the hops, almost lemony. You guess that's what you get for hauling the base ingredient all day. You taste it in its most honest form, and you think back to the fish token brew, the temple jars, the rooftop batches. All of them start here. At dusk, back in the city, the temple quarter flickers with torchlight. You see young scribes still scratching away at clay, probably trying to balance barley in against beer out. You hear priests reciting grain prayers, calling down blessings for the next season. You even spot your cousin arguing with another apprentice over the weight of a half-dried token. Nerds. And then it clicks. Everyone's doing the same thing. Whether it's the tax collectors, the underground brewers, the field workers, or the guy with the goat who bleats at samples, everyone's playing their part in this strange, frothy cycle. You get home and add your payment jar to your stash. Your cousin eyes it. From the barley run, you nod. Yours if you don't correct my tablet grammar this week. She doesn't hesitate. She takes it. Later that night, you sit by your door with a bowl of lentils, watching the alley cool down. A stray dog trots past. Somewhere nearby, someone laughs too loud. You think about what you've learned. Beer in this world isn't extra. It isn't a luxury. It's the tax, the payment, the fuel, the drink of gods and ditch diggers, of rulers and children, of festival goers and field hands. It's in every jar, every tablet, every argument about barley weights. And yet, despite all that, it's also something personal. Flavor, recipe, ritual, trade. Historians still argue whether Sumerians thought of beer primarily as food, religion, medicine, or currency. You lean back, but to you, drenched in sweat and sipping a cool jar under a fading sky, beer, it's all of that. The gods never run out. By morning, the air smells different, like dust warming up, mixed with baking clay and the faintest touch of river algae. You stretch, groan, and try to remember what day it is. Judging by the temple gongs in the distance, it's market day, or as your cousin likes to call it, the day everyone forgets how to walk in a straight line. You tie your robe, tuck a coin or two into your belt, more for show than spending, and grab one of your sealed beer jars. Not your best, not your worst. Just enough to trade or brag with, depending on your mood. The marketplace is already humming by the time you arrive. Rows of awnings flap lazily overhead, shading stalls packed with everything from woven sandals to dried fish that definitely passed their prime 2 sunrises ago. You dodge a camel, nod to a potter, and smile at a fruit seller's toddler who's got date syrup smeared from eyebrow to chin. But what you're really here for is the beer aisle. It's not marked, of course. No ancient neon sign shouting local brews. But you know where to go. Tucked just behind the baker's row, in the shadow of a shrine to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer herself, you spot them. The casual brewers, merchant wives, old soldiers turned froth slingers, each standing behind rows of clay jars marked with hand-etched symbols. A sunburst means honeyed brew. 3 lines. High alcohol for feasts. A tiny turtle. That's Mako's infamous slow burn batch, more punch than flavor. You walk slowly, nodding at familiar faces, exchanging sips here and there. A few offer you trades, jars for jars. Others ask outright what temple you pay taxes to, or whether you're interested in a new yeast strain from upriver. One man even tries to sell you a fermenting amulet carved from crocodile tooth, guaranteed to prevent sour batches. Fringe stuff. You smile politely. I'm already blessed. He doesn't get the joke. Now, here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient Sumerian marketplaces were not just for exchanging goods, they were knowledge hubs. Recipes, brewing techniques, even tax tips were traded alongside fish and fabrics. Some beer vendors were effectively early microbreweries, each with their loyal customers and secret tricks. These were the spaces where ideas fermented as much as grain. You meet a woman named Daganitu, probably in her 40s, with arms like amphora handles and a laugh that rattles your teeth. Her stall smells like cinnamon and burnt figs. She gestures at your jar. You trade? You nod. She uncorks hers. The aroma hits you like a dream, warm, spicy, and oddly familiar. You taste. It's thick and sweet, almost chewy. You nod appreciatively. She tries yours and raises an eyebrow. Your malt's clean. You filter with date leaves. You blink. How do you know? She taps her nose. Same trick. Learned it from my uncle. He was a temple brewer until he got caught skimming tokens. You glance at her setup, modest but precise. No excess. Everything in her space screams control. This isn't hobby brewing. It's craft. Ever pay taxes with it? You ask. She snorts. Once. They didn't know what to do with it. Too strong for the workers, too weird for the priests. I ended up trading it for goats. You laugh. She doesn't. Serious, she says. 3 goats. One of them screamed like a flute. I still have nightmares. You both sip in silence for a moment, watching a pair of kids argue over a straw mat. You glance at the nearby temple tax scribe booth, a dull little stone table where a bored man is weighing grain. There's no line, no excitement, just the slow grind of bureaucracy. And then you look back at this row of brewers, each with their own style, symbols, and stories. It hits you. This is tax adjacent, a parallel system. Not official, but real. Each trade here represents labor, value, time. These brewers aren't avoiding the tax system. They've built something beside it, a loop, a shared economy. Historians still argue whether this kind of exchange system undermined temple authority or supplemented it. Some say the temple tolerated it as long as their own supply chains weren't disrupted. Others argue these brewers paved the way for early privatized commerce. You sip your fig cinnamon brew and think both could be true. You finish your market round with 2 new jars, one spicy, one smoky, and a mental note to steal Daganitu's filtering technique. Back home, you set your new acquisitions next to your own batch. The variety in color alone is wild, one pale like sand, the other nearly as dark as a date pit. You can't resist. You sip both again, then yours. Back and forth. A little tasting game. Yours is fine, clean, nutty, safe. But theirs push boundaries. You start scribbling notes. Not on a tablet this time, just on a clay shard, tucked into your brew shelf. You're not writing for taxes. You're writing for yourself. That night you host a little gathering. Nothing big. Just your cousin, 2 neighbors, and that merchant who keeps trying to trade you fermented onions. You lay out bread, lentils, a little dried fish. And then, the jars. Everyone sips, some gag, some nod slowly. One person swears the smoky brew cured their hiccups. It's chaotic, loud, perfect. Someone suggests a rating system. Your cousin starts carving symbols into a tablet, laughing the whole time. You pour, they rate. It's part science, part gossip, part art. And somewhere between the second jar and the fourth, someone says, "This should be taxed," and everyone groans. "Don't jinx it," you yell, laughing. But it's true. This new kind of exchange, this casual rating, this shared brewfest, it could get formal. Someone will notice. A priest, a merchant, a bureaucrat with a clipboard and too much time, and they'll want their cut. You sigh, lean back, and take one last sip of smoky bliss. For now, the temple hasn't found this little bubble of creativity. But it's only a matter of time. By now, your beer shelf is looking less like storage and more like a miniature museum. Clay jars in every hue of terracotta, some etched with your cousin's mock rating system. 5 reads equals, "Don't serve this to your enemies." Others marked with chalky fingerprints from dusty afternoons at the market. And today you're adding one more. Not because of a trade or a new batch or even a goat deal gone wrong. Nope. This jar arrives by courier. A solemn boy, probably 12, marches up to your door at midday, hands you a sealed clay container, and announces, "For your review, citizen brewer. Compliments of the Temple of Ninkasi." You blink. Wait, what? The boy shrugs, then points to the seal, a fish symbol, crossed with the temple's barley emblem. You know that mark. It's the tax office's food and beverage review wing. Yup, that's a thing. Mainstream historical fact. The Sumerians had complex bureaucracies for temple operations, including dedicated personnel to manage food rations, brewing standards, and even inspection of taxable goods. Beer tasters were actually listed in temple rosters, real jobs, probably envied by anyone with a tongue and a flexible afternoon. You take the jar inside, turning it over in your hands. It's heavy, well sealed, and smells faintly like fermented plums even through the stopper. You uncork it carefully. This is temple stuff, probably blessed and possibly strong enough to reanimate a dead goat. The aroma hits first, honey, cloves, something sharp like vinegar, but in a good way. You pour a little into a shell cup and take a cautious sip. It's incredible. Rich, layered, smooth on the tongue and complex in the finish. If beer had poetry, this would be a haiku whispered during a solar eclipse. Your cousin enters mid-sip. "You're drinking temple bribes now?" you explain. She snorts. "They want feedback? From you?" You both laugh. But then the letter arrives, not by courier but by clay. A small tablet, pressed and dried, delivered with a thump on your doorstep. You squint at the tight script, too neat to be casual, too direct to be flowery. To brewer your name, whose market batches reach the tasting table of the high scribe of taxation. Your inclusion in the fiscal brew census is approved. All registered brews now subject to monthly declaration. You pause. Brew census? Declaration? Oh no. You show the tablet to your cousin. She reads it, then points to the bottom where there's a tiny seal of approval. Same fish and barley emblem, but now with a third symbol. A jar tilted sideways as if pouring. "They're counting your beer now," she says, blinking. "It's taxable." And there it is, the line you hoped wouldn't come. Your hobby is no longer yours alone. Your experiments, your trades, your smoky fig fiascos, they're officially part of the temple economy. You sit in stunned silence. It's flattering, sure. The temple scribe himself sipping your brew. Wild. But it also means scrutiny, inventories, weights and measures, token tallies. You can already imagine the questions. How many jars did you brew this month? What % of your barley intake was used? Did you tithe the appropriate portion? You know how this works. You've worked within it. You just never thought your humble setup would become it. That night, instead of brewing, you clean. You rearrange your shelf, reseal old jars, smooth out old clay sherds. You try to make it look respectable. There's a knock. It's Daganitu. She steps inside, looks around and smirks. "Let me guess. You got the fish barley jar seal?" You nod. She tosses you a small jar. "Congratulations, you've joined the bureaucratic brewers club. We meet on Wednesdays and cry into our measuring sticks." You both laugh, but there's a heaviness behind it. Over cups of her newest blend, spicy, peppery, and weirdly fizzy, you talk shop. Turns out this brew census is a new initiative, part of a larger temple reform. Some high priest decided that too much barley was vanishing off the books, blamed unauthorized brewing, which is code for everyone not brewing in a temple vat. So now the temple's pulling everyone in. You want to make beer? Fine, but they'll count it, tax it, maybe even standardize it. Historians still argue whether these reforms helped stabilize the economy or stifled grassroots innovation. Some tablets suggest temple efficiency improved. Others hint at black market brewing exploding in response. You and Daganitu agree on one thing. Creativity doesn't thrive under scales and seals. Before she leaves, she gives you a tip. Label every jar with barley yield, mash time, and fermentation date, even if you make it up. They love that. You write it down, in triplicate. Later you stare at your shelf again. It's still yours, but it's less free. The beer you make now must be declared, valued, reviewed, adjusted for tax. The jar from the temple sits at the center, gleaming, perfect, and a little smug, if you're honest. You open your ledger and begin a new section. Brews counted for census, year of the long flood. It feels wrong at first, formal, cold, but halfway down the list you add one extra column. Taste notes. Just for you. You pause before writing the first one. Then slowly. Sweet start. Hits like a priest's sandal. Good for cold nights and quiet rebellions. You smile. If they're going to count your beer, you're going to remember why you brewed it in the first place. And maybe, just maybe, you'll brew something so good, even the tax scribes forget to tally it. You wake the next morning with a very official headache, somewhere between the temple's honey clove beer and your cousin's moonlit flute practice. The sunlight creeps in like a nosy scribe, highlighting your shelf of now taxable creativity. It's not just clay and foam anymore, it's paperwork in liquid form. You rub your eyes, roll your shoulders, and trudge over to your brewing table. It looks sterile, like someone might walk in any minute to audit your grain bins or quiz you on fermentation times. And honestly, someone might. A few days ago, a temple official in a stiff linen robe showed up and spent half an hour pretending to casually admire your jars. He made a big show of sniffing, swirling, and nodding as if he had a degree in beerology. Then he pulled out a stylus and marked something on a wax tablet. Didn't say what. Just smiled, thanked you, and vanished. Mainstream historical fact. Temple-appointed tasting scribes existed to ensure the quality of brews destined for rationing or religious use. Their evaluations could influence taxation levels, quality rankings, or even priestly recognition for brewers. A glowing tablet comment might mean better grain allotments next month, a poor review, fewer jars allowed in circulation, and higher taxes. So now, like a true citizen brewer, you're caught in the holy loop of praise and punishment. You decide to go for a walk, get some air, avoid your own fermentation anxiety. Down by the canal, workers are unloading sacks of grain, barley, emmer wheat, and some mystery mash labeled with the temple's triple seal emblem. A little girl sits nearby on an overturned jar, swinging her legs and singing the Ninkasi hymn at the top of her lungs. She gets half the words wrong and invents a few new ones, including foam dragon and bubble god. Honestly, not bad. You sit on a stone, half listening, half thinking. This isn't just about beer anymore, it's about identity. You remember your first brew, thin, sour, and strong enough to scare birds off the roof. You remember learning to ferment with date paste, figuring out the exact moment the mash turned, and hiding from your cousin when a batch exploded across the kitchen like hot porridge. Now the temple sends you tasting jars. Now your barley counts go into ledgers with gold seals. Now your name's listed somewhere, probably misspelled, under recognized beverage contributors. It's flattering, and a little terrifying. That night you meet with Daganitu and two other brewers at her courtyard. You sit under clay lanterns shaped like barley stalks and swap stories of recent inspections. One guy, tall and nervous, claims a scribe asked him for a private batch, just for the high priest's dreams. Another says he had to explain what frothy on the finish meant to someone who clearly had no tongue. You drink, you complain, you laugh. Then Daganitu leans forward and says, "Let's push it." You blink. Push what? She grins. The flavor boundary, the brew line, whatever this new census is, we test its limits. A quiet buzz passes through the group. There's risk in that kind of thinking, but also fun. Daganitu brings out a sealed jar. No markings, no temple stamp, no standard measures. She pours. The liquid is deep orange, flecked with what looks like flower petals. It smells like honey, smoke, and something medicinal. You all taste. It's confusing, bold, almost too bold, like a brew trying to shout its story all at once. There's pepper, citrus, and a bitter underbite like burnt tree bark. The aftertaste tingles. Your lips feel warm. It's not bad, you say. It's illegal, says the nervous brewer. But not declared, Daganitu says. Not in the census. So technically, it's experimental, you finish. That's the loophole. Historians still argue whether these kinds of non-declared brews were tolerated or penalized. Some believe temple scribes had a taste for the strange and unofficial, often acquiring samples in personal capacities. Others say that brewers caught withholding jars risked penalties, grain fines, public shaming, or even restricted brewing privileges. You all agree on one thing: don't get caught. A new plan is born. Each of you will make one experimental batch per moon cycle, not for trade, not for temple, just for tasting. A secret brew. You return home and immediately start sketching ideas. Cinnamon and river mint, roasted fig and ash, a wild yeast from the rooftops. You pick one. By next week, the jar is ready. You mark it with a single dot, no words, no symbols. It sits on your shelf like a silent rebellion. But just as you lift it to taste, there's a knock. Another temple courier. This time she hands you not just a tablet, but an invitation. To the distinguished brewers of Uruk, the temple invites your presence for the solstice pouring. Each brewer shall present one crafted jar for ceremonial sampling. Selection is mandatory, appearance required. Mandatory? You stare at the stylus-etched words. This isn't just taxes anymore, it's performance. Your cousin peeks over your shoulder. "Well," she says, "you're a star now." You groan. Later that night, you pace your courtyard, holding the invitation in one hand and your secret jar in the other. Should you bring it? Is that foolish, brave, taxable? You decide to sleep on it. Dreams come slow, laced with barley fields, foamy jars, and a priest with too many teeth saying, "One taste decides your future." You wake before sunrise, jar still in hand. Whatever happens next, you're in the spotlight now. And your beer, your story, is going public. The morning of the solstice pouring is hot, sticky, cling to your clothes hot. The kind of weather that makes barley sweat before you even mash it. You tug at your linen robe, which someone, probably your cousin, insisted you starch, and try not to breathe too deeply. Because today, friend, you are not just a brewer. You are a public spectacle. Your jar, just one, is tucked carefully in a woven reed basket, cushioned with barley husks and a folded cloth embroidered with your name. It looks fancier than it is. Still just clay and yeast and hope inside. But perception matters now, especially when the temple gate looms ahead like the mouth of some ancient, thirsty beast. You're not alone. A line of brewers stretches along the outer wall, each clutching their own single offering. There's Daganitu, looking supremely unbothered in a robe made entirely of stitched-together brewery scraps. One guy in front of you is visibly sweating through his tunic. His jaw rattles when he exhales. No one speaks much. Mainstream historical fact. Public tasting ceremonies were a real part of Sumerian religious and civic life. During festivals like the solstice or New Year, temples held feasts and presentations where brewers, bakers, and cooks displayed their best. It wasn't just celebration, it was state-sanctioned quality control. A good brew could earn status, a bad one could earn silence. The temple courtyard is buzzing. Priests and scribes flit around like nervous bees. Tables are set with reed mats, tasting cups, and styluses sharpened to judgmental points. On a raised platform sits the high taster, an elderly priest with a serene face and suspiciously rosy cheeks. Someone coughs, someone else drops their jar. It shatters, everyone winces. Your turn comes faster than expected. A scribe gestures. You step forward, placing your jar on the table. No label, just the clay, just the brew. You open it with practiced care. The seal pops with a satisfying hiss. A whiff of toasted fig and wild mint escapes into the air like a very polite ghost. The high taster nods. You pour. He sips, he pauses. For too long. He sips again, then looks up. Unexpected. He writes something. You can't see it. Then nothing. He moves on. That's it? You're ushered away by a junior priest with extremely sweaty hands. No thumbs up, no brilliant use of fennel. Just unexpected. You find Daganitu again at the edge of the courtyard. She raises an eyebrow. How'd it go? You mimic the high taster's face. Blank, serene, slightly itchy. She laughs. Could have been worse. He once called my date and dill blend a grave error. You both sit on a low wall and watch the tasting continue. One brewer gets applause. Another gets a headshake so vigorous you're sure his taxes just doubled. Eventually, the sun dips low. The ceremony ends. The crowd trickles away. You walk home slower than usual, basket in hand, head full of fizzing questions. What did unexpected mean? Historians still argue whether these ceremonial tastings influenced official tax rates or were more about religious symbolism and community cohesion. Some argue they were political, the temple's way of picking favorites. Others believe they reflected genuine attempts at economic inclusion, letting average citizens participate in resource management. You just want to know if unexpected means you'll owe extra barley this month. Back home, your cousin is waiting. Well, she asks. You shrug. My beer was unexpected. She blinks. Like, good unexpected. I think so. She pours you a cup of your own brew. Your secret jar had been set aside, unopened. You both sip, sitting on the stairs as the city quiets down. It tastes better now. Maybe it's the night air. Maybe it's the knowing that people tasted your work and didn't spit it out. Maybe it's just that you're no longer brewing for just yourself. That night, you take out your ledger again. You update your census notes. Add a new category, Temple Review. Under that, you write, unexpected, tasted under moonlight, slightly terrified. And under taste notes, you scribble, fennel spark, fig echo, good with roasted turnips and existential dread. You add a doodle of a happy frog, just because. You lie in bed afterward, the hum of insects outside blending with the rhythmic burble of distant brewing pots. The air smells faintly of wet clay and cooked grain. Somewhere, someone drops a jar. Someone else laughs. Life moves, even when measured. The beer will keep flowing. The taxes will keep coming. And the temple will always, always want a sip. But now, you're a part of that story. You close your eyes. The barley fields wave behind your lids. A high priest takes another sip. The foam rises, the flavors swirl, and the Sumerian sun sets golden across a city built on clay, sweat, and the world's oldest drink. And as the night deepens, the story settles. The courtyards of Uruk grow still. The last jars of the day cool in their shade. Somewhere, a cat pads across a rooftop, nudging a cup that rolls in lazy circles. Your hands, still carrying traces of barley dust and river water, rest beside you. You feel the soft ache of effort, the kind that only comes from creation. Real, messy, human work. And whether your jar was labeled unexpected, mediocre, or divine, you brewed something only you could make. Let that sink in like the warm weight of a wool blanket. Let it soften your thoughts, all the ledgers and laws, the scribes and scales. They pass like wind across stone. What stays is the taste, the memory, the rhythm of a process older than kings. So for now, let it go. No jars to count, no seals to polish, just you, the hush of ancient streets, and the comfort of knowing you've added your note to a symphony thousands of years in the making. Breathe in. Let the barley fade. Let the foam settle. Sleep comes gently, like a priest's whisper. And hey, maybe tomorrow's batch will be even better.